Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a very special guest today, Meghan Murphy, Canadian, which is always nice. I've got a couple of friends up there that do journalism and work like that. Deborah So is a good friend of mine, so it's nice to talk to somebody from a different area that's experiencing some of the same weird issues we are.
Yeah, I actually have dual citizenship, although I've never lived in America, but I'm definitely like feeling a lot of I'm very grateful to have my dual citizenship considering how things in Canada have gone of late.
Yeah, you guys have had quite a bit more direct government censorship, I guess, than we have in the United States, even though the United States government's kind of colluded with social media to do stuff. For you guys, it's been a bit more direct. It's how a couple of, well, not a couple, but quite a few, I guess, political commentators have rose to prominence, Jordan Peterson being one of them. I don't think anybody ever would have known who he is if it weren't for the misgendering bill that you guys have.
Right. Yeah. Jordan Peterson and I were almost the only ones in Canada to speak out against Bill C-16 when that happened in 2017. And he became like a millionaire and I did not, which I can only assume is sexism.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that what's going on in Canada is worse in some ways. I mean, what's happened in America with the social media censorship has been really bad, and what we've discovered around media in general in America and their extreme biases is really bad. Justin Trudeau, though, is trying to legislate against freedom of expression online.
Now, I think in any other time in Western civilization, you would be pretty solidly on the left, probably. Doesn't it feel like exhausting and irritating that you have to deal with this bullshit? I mean, we were just having a conversation amongst a group of us earlier today about how it's almost like you find yourself in these positions these days where you're kind of politically aligned with people that you wouldn't want to be seen in public with sometimes, you know what I mean? Just because everything's gotten so crazy.
I mean, I honestly have sort of stopped caring who I appear to be aligned with or what people call me. I think I've been called so many things over the years throughout my career that have not made any sense or are misrepresentative, that at this point I'm like, okay, whatever. People are going to call me whatever they feel like calling me, and I'm just going to have to keep doing and saying what I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, I was a socialist for pretty much my whole life. I came from a Marxist family. My dad was a postie in Canada. He was heavily involved in the union. When me and my sister were kids, we would go on strike with him and attend union meetings. And, you know, he was a member of our left party. So even left of the Liberal Party, which is the party in power right now. The NDP is even left of there. And, you know, we were NDP supporters. I was an NDP supporter for my whole life. I voted NDP in every provincial and federal election until like a few years ago, at which point I just stopped voting because they just, I mean, I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I cannot vote for a party that claims not to know what a woman is, for example. But the left has become, I think, so hypocritical and so lacking in integrity, so cowardly, so elitist, so uninterested in what actual real working class people think and care about. It's so insulting, and they should be ashamed, and yet they're not.
Yeah, you would think so, right? I mean, it seems like for a long time the I guess leftists in North America especially can kind of consider themselves the party of the working people, right? Not that that was ever necessarily true. I don't know that it was or it wasn't. I don't think any politician gives two fucks about anybody except for themselves and their own power, frankly. But they at least pulled it off to some degree, and people believed it. But that epistemology is certainly fracturing now. I think more and more people are realizing that that's not the case, and there are some people I think that are maybe moving to the right on that issue. But I think more based on the data I've seen, especially there's a poll out earlier this week to this effect. But it seems like more people are just politically homeless at this point, and I wonder what the result of that is going to be ultimately, because there is still so much division regardless. But the populist movements from the left and the right, I've said this for a very long time, for years now on this show, that they're a lot more aligned in reality than they will ever be based on their political affiliation, right? I mean, it's just people, by and large, want to be free and left alone to do what they want to do for the most part. It seems like that's been, especially in North America, that's been a trait that's pretty common amongst both groups of people. And for some reason, their attention always seems to get captured by one side or the other, depending on, what cycle we're in or how they were raised or something like that. And I'm sure in my earlier years I was guilty of myself. I just don't know I don't know what comes next. You know what I mean? Like people do have to work together to build communities and survive and shit. But what's that going to look like in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that tribalism is inherent to human beings. So, on some level, I worry that this kind of division is not something that will fully be overcome. People like to be part of a group, which I think is why people do this thing where it's like, I'm on the left, I'm on the right, or they want to put you in boxes or me in boxes. Everybody has to be a thing. You can't just be I can't just be Meghan Murphy, who's an independent thinker. I was on the left for a really long time. I identified as a feminist for a really long time. And now that I've sort of started pushing back against and even rejecting those labels really in favor of independent thought and, coming to my own conclusions about ideas and policies and politics outside of ideology, outside of parties, then people, of course, are going to call me right wing. And, there's not really much I can do about those labels, but it doesn't even make any sense. Like, sometimes when people say that, I'll ask them, I'm like, what are my right wing positions? Just out of curiosity. Like, what is it that you even mean when you say that? But I think for the most part, they just mean not left.
Right. Yeah.
You're not saying these mantras that are attached to the left nowadays, therefore you must be right wing. Or you're questioning leftist policies and ideologies, therefore you must be right wing. And that's happened to me in so many different ways. I mean, just pretty recently, I've always been critical of the harm reduction model, for example. I come from Vancouver, and Vancouver's downtown east side has always been the, homelessness addiction center of Vancouver. And like what's happened in other cities like San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, that's really expanded and gotten a lot worse in the past couple of years, in part because of progressive policy and this sort of blind dedication to the harm reduction model, but just the harm reduction model. So just give them their drugs, decriminalize everything, leave them alone, let these tent cities just kind of fester. Anyone who tries to intervene is violent. And, my perspective on all that had for a long time been around the homelessness thing. Like I was like, just let people do their drugs if they want to do their drugs. They just need a home. And what I've come to realize is that a lot of those people living on the street are living there by choice. Like they could have access to living spaces, but that addiction, crime, lifestyle works better for them in these kind of tent cities. But it's just it's not just affecting the addict, right? It's affecting the whole city. It's made that area and the areas around it really, really
Mm,
unsafe. Like the assault rates are way higher, crime rates are higher. People are getting attacked on the street for no reason at all. And this is expanding into all sorts of other neighborhoods beyond the downtown east side. And because I've been talking about those things and talking about the idea, which is something that I've learned from ex-addicts, the idea that sometimes things like jail or, if it was feasible, mandated rehab
mm,
are the things that save these people. Because if you're caught up in that cycle of addiction and crime, and you're not being put in prison, you're sort of not even really given the opportunity to clean up. Like,
sure.
how do you get out of that situation when you're in it every single day? And so people, of course, treat me like I'm this fascist because I talk about things like that and talk
Mm,
about the fact that, like, I mean, as much as, I'm a freedom person and I want people to be able to live their lives as they see fit. But in this case, we're talking about crime, right?
sure. Yeah.
We're not just talking about addiction. We're talking about crime and health hazards and people getting like assaulted and murdered. So
Mm,
it's not just a live and let live situation at this
sure. Yeah. I mean,
point.
what's the old sayings? You're right to swing your fist ends at my face, I believe. Which
Right.
is, maybe reductive to some degree. But yeah, I think aside from the difficulty that it presents for cities and the people in those cities, the premise that it's good for the homeless is categorically ridiculous. I mean, if your child was misbehaving, you wouldn't find a safe space for them to continue to misbehave. That's a ridiculous idea. Nobody thinks that way
Yeah.
until all of a sudden over the past couple of decades, for some reason, it's become it's part of like the you said mantra earlier. It's almost like a cult where if you don't repeat every line exactly, some Catholic lady comes by and raps you on the hand with a ruler. You know what I mean? It's very bizarre how protective they are of this newly generated epistemology where there is no reality at all. Victims are the priority and things like this. It's very bizarre to me how this all happened, and I think it is. I'm not sure if it happened on purpose. Some part of me thinks it did, but I'm not sure if it happened on purpose or if this just is the inevitable result of taking your eye off the ball. You know what I mean? In society and just letting things coast. I mean, we've seen it before. The weird rage and violent decadence of Roman culture as it progressed through the second and third centuries and stuff like that. None of this stuff is new. It's happened before in human history. I just wonder. I don't know that it's happened this quickly before with so many eyeballs on it and people it's one thing for it to have happened in a time where you got most of your news from some asshole shouting in the center of the city, you know what I mean? But now it's like you can look up stuff. I can tell that these people are lying to me and we all know that they're lying. So what the fuck are we doing here?
Yeah, and we can tell that what these people are saying, these progressives, if we want to call them that, are saying isn't evidenced with reality. What they're talking about is ideology. They're not talking about real life. This whole thing where perpetrators are suddenly victims, right? Like these guys who are addicted, mentally ill, insane, dangerous, stealing, punching, raping, murdering. But because they're, homeless and they're addicts and they're living on the street, they're untouchable, right? They're actually the victims. They're not actually the victims. They're the
Mm,
perpetrators. And it's okay to say that. And I mean, this has been going on for a long time. I think it's just gotten a lot worse. Like, I remember when I was younger, probably, I don't know, in my late 20s or something like that, explaining to one of my friends, like, you don't actually have to be nice and friendly to a guy who's like harassing you or making you feel comfortable or being weird to you on the bus just because he's marginalized, just because he's like a homeless
mm,
addict. Like, those guys are scary. And like, I knew women who got assaulted on the downtown east side by these guys. Like, I've been like really, really scared. I used to walk home through the downtown east side from work every day. And I've been followed and screamed at and threatened and spat on and just terrified. Nobody does anything about it. They just all pretend it's not happening, right? But it's like there's sort of an expectation in feminism too, and on the left that you can't be judgmental or you can't be like you can't say what's true, which is like this guy's a crazy guy
Hmm.
and a drug addict. Oh, all men sexually harass, all men rape, like all men are dangerous. It's all the same. It's not all the same. Like, yeah, technically that's true. All sorts of different men have raped women
Hmm.
from different backgrounds. But this is a particularly dangerous situation. This is a dangerous neighborhood. Men who are addicted and mentally ill and like on frickin' meth are not safe men to be around, period.
Yeah, I mean, would you like hand this guy your baby or something? Like, how much? Where exactly is
It's
the
all the
line?
same.
You know what I mean? I guess I find myself asking that a lot. Where exactly is the line? Um, it is certainly the case that your behavior can affect your entry and participation into society, as should that be the case, right? I mean, what you can't just act like a fucking jackass all the time and expect people to treat you like you're being nice. I don't know why. I don't know why that all of a sudden became the expectation. You know, a lot of people frame it as some kind of like pathological level of empathy, but I don't think it's that because the results are very clear. Somebody who just lobbies for an open air drug market, for example, they do not give a fuck about that person. There's no way they care about that person because nobody would do that. If it was your child, would you be okay with him living in a tent in downtown San Francisco, walking across the street, begging for money and shooting heroin into their fucking veins? Really? That's you being empathetic. That doesn't make any sense to me.
And those drug dealers are really dangerous men. I was actually just in San Francisco last week and I met up with Michael Schellenberger and Leighton Woodhouse, who are doing a lot of journalism around that issue in that area. So they're working on a documentary right now. So
Hmm.
they took me on a walk through the Tenderloin, which is, I guess, like the worst part,
Hmm.
but although again it's expanded throughout the whole city, to shoot and to try to interview some people down there, and they explained the situation to me, and like it's like these guys, like these drug dealers are Honduran. They're recruited by I think a Mexican gang, by the cartel down there. And they're really, really dangerous men. Like they're men who do really bad
Hmm.
stuff. And to take a position of like, oh, don't criminalize. It's like, don't judge, don't stigmatize, just let this happen. It's like, you're letting really dangerous criminals run the show. There's not a single cop down there, not a single
Oh yeah,
cop.
I know. Yeah, I lived in Oakland and worked in San Francisco for a long time, and it was I watched it deteriorate between like 2012 and 2015. Mostly is when it started to really go downhill, and it was bizarre, man. I mean, it used to be a really nice city. Um,
Right.
Lots of foot traffic. There's a lot of different little neighborhoods. You can go park somewhere and walk around for a couple of hours and do a bunch of different stuff. And now there's no fucking way I would do that. I mean, not that I'm particularly worried about it because I'm a big dude that's been in a lot of fights and been in a lot of gunfights and stuff, so I'm not really concerned about that. But why even go there? You know what I mean? It's just I'm not going to Iraq for vacation either, frankly. But
No,
it
and it's scary to walk around anywhere. Like I was staying in Union Square, and it's like I don't want to walk a block in that neighborhood.
Union Square used to be the cleanest part of that city, and now there's like just they. I remember in 2013 or something they put in. They started putting like permanent outdoor restrooms around there, and I mean you can imagine what happened there. It was just fucking bums going in to shoot drugs or whatever the
Hmm.
fuck. I mean it was crazy. I want to come back to something else. So you've talked about uh, today feminism, and you've also talked about it quite a bit in the work you've done. And I'm curious if you could, for the audience, kind of explain the difference between classical or first and second wave feminism versus third wave or even beyond what we're experiencing today. Just because
Hmm.
I'm not sure people really have a good grasp on it. And frankly, I think most people, especially most people that listen to me talk for a living, would they hear the word feminism and they immediately associate it with third wave or beyond, right? But that's not
Right.
necessarily how it's always been.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I fully understand people's frustration and distaste for feminism today
Mm,
because I feel the exact same way. And for, for the past 10 years, since I've been writing about feminism and doing radio and things like that around feminism and feminist issues, most of my work has been around criticizing third wave feminism because I think that it's stupid. And I think that it's anti-woman. I think that it's totally superficial, embarrassing nonsense. And but what people see and what people understand around feminism is that. So fair enough, but at the same time I feel frustrated because the women's movement was an incredibly important movement. So first wave feminism is generally associated with like the suffragettes,
mm,
so women fighting for the right to vote. There was also other issues that women fought for, property rights,
mm,
for example. And it was a very successful movement, obviously, but it took them like almost a century. Like those women fought, it wasn't just like a span of a few
mm,
years. Like those women had to fight for a really, really, really long time to get the vote. And they had to, those, I mean, one of my frustrations around how the first wave feminists are painted by third wave feminists is that they're all painted as a bunch of racist white ladies.
mm,
The story goes that like women wanted the vote and they didn't care about black people, if black men or women got the vote. When in fact what happened was a lot of those women, a lot of those suffragettes came out of the abolitionist movement and were fighting against slavery and fighting with black men to get the vote. And when it came around to black men getting the vote, the black men said, "Sorry, ladies, you've got to wait." And so a bunch of those women were like, "Screw this," and went off on their own and fought for their own right to vote without the black men anymore.
mm,
So it sort of actually went down the opposite way of how it's been told. Um, Second wave feminism was, of course, about reproductive rights, abortion rights, things like sexual harassment in the workplace, and also radical feminism came out of the second wave in and around, the 70s, early 80s. So that's when we started to see activism around pornography, for example, and things like beauty standards and beauty pageants and things like that. And that also I think was a really, really important movement. And then we came to the third wave, which started in the 90s and started with kind of like that riot girl thing,
mm,
like Kathleen
mm,
Hanna and um L7 and those kinds of punky girl groups. Um which I think was okay. It was a kind of empowerment that was like anti-rape and again anti-sexual harassment and also pushing back against girls being labeled sluts and things like that. But it really morphed into this slut empowerment thing, quite literally. Um, like when I first started writing about feminism, one of the first things that I spoke out against was this thing called slut walk, which I don't know if you remember that at all. It happened in 2011 and it started in Toronto and expanded throughout the world, in fact. And it was like this march for like slut empowerment, essentially. It was supposed to be against victim blaming. That was the initial claim.
yeah. I mean,
There was
I
some
get
like
it from at the root level. I understand it, but that's like a bunch of Chads marching with their popped up collars for. It's just like the worst traits that we have, and we're gonna go on a march
chicks
for
out
it.
in like their bras and underwear
Yeah,
who
so
wrote like "I'm a slut" across their bodies and then paraded down the
yeah.
street. And I was like, "Oh, this is very empowering. This is a really important message. This is not at all embarrassing for the feminist movement." And like, what on earth do you think you're achieving with this? And all of those girls were they tried to this is when feminism started trying to kind of like degender
Mm.
everything and started to say things like feminism is for all genders. This isn't just about women. This is for everybody. And whatever you think is empowering is empowering. Like if you feel empowered by wearing stilettos or putting porny photos of yourself on the internet or by wearing makeup, then that's feminist. You go girl. Like that kind of nonsense, right? And of course, then we encountered all the trans crap. So all of a sudden, it was, a man could become a woman by announcing that he's a woman and he had to be included in women's spaces in the feminist movement, obviously in women and girls change rooms, and everything just really went downhill from there.
It's
Sorry, I don't know if
yeah.
that was a helpful summary or
Yeah, yeah,
too
sure,
long.
yeah. No, it's interesting that it seemed to start to kind of go downhill in the second wave a little bit. I mean, you get a mixed group. Maybe that's just how it is, right? There's always a transition period where you've got some of the old guard that just wanted to do what they wanted to do, and then other people. At some point, it seems like, in regardless of what movement it is, at some point people get this authoritarian bend to their messaging. You know what I mean? It's like, not
Yeah.
only do I get to do what I want to do, but you have to recognize me, you have to support me, and you have to say the same things I do. Otherwise, you're against me. It's like, no, I just don't give a shit what you do, frankly. If somebody's trying to stop you from doing what you want to do, come find me and I'll help you out. But otherwise, leave me the fuck out of it. That's generally the attitude that I think a lot of Americans have.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that there is something inherent to movements where they do get a bit culty, and that certainly happened with
I mean,
feminism.
it becomes an
Um,
industry, right? It's just like anything
yeah.
else, and you have to. There's an old saying: "Solved problems don't get out the vote." I think is how it goes, and it's like,
Right.
if we solve this
Totally.
issue, like, hey, you know what, women are doing pretty well now. We're relatively gender egalitarian in the West now. It's like, no, but then my organization doesn't have a purpose anymore, so that's not going to work for me. So we've got to find the next thing to move on to, right?
Well, and I mean, the Democrats seem to be trying to galvanize votes based on the abortion
Mm.
debate and based on this trans thing, right? Which, I think that the Democrats are very clearly invested in ensuring that the abortion debate rages on
Forever,
because it
yes.
gets them so many votes
Mm.
from, youngish women. And uh so, like you said, I don't think they want that issue to be resolved. And I mean, it's exactly true. Like mainstream feminism became mainstream feminism. Like all these women who are saying trans women and are women and are big name feminists, they make a lot of money off of their so-called feminism. These are careerists. These aren't women invested in women's rights, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, any woman who's like standing for Planned Parenthood at this point, I think, is full of shit. Like Planned Parenthood is now the like second largest provider in the US of these trans treatments for kids, puberty blockers,
Yeah.
hormones, which render kids sterilized and, fuck them up for life.
Yeah, and about 3% of their budget goes to actual reproductive health care, which
Yeah.
is comically low, frankly.
It's at this point, it's all about money and funding. Like these people have zero integrity. The modern mainstream feminist movement has zero
Mm.
integrity. They're just saying whatever they have to say to keep their
But that might just
income.
be the way it goes in movements like that, right? So you have to keep pushing it farther. Like you said, if you want to keep these young voters engaged or female voters engaged, and women vote more than men do, and also there's more women than there are men in the West. So that's a pretty good marketing strategy, I suppose. But you have to continue, quote unquote, progressing, I guess. But it just keeps getting weirder. Like it was late term abortion, which is I don't really care about abortion at all. It doesn't fucking I never think about it. I don't care. It's has nothing to do with me, frankly. I don't believe in any of that shit. But it seems like the late term thing was just to put a thumb in the eye of people who are not abortion or people who are whatever they call themselves, pro life. You know
Pro-life,
what I mean?
yeah.
And then with the trans stuff, it's like it's become a fucking clown show, frankly. Like this, I don't want to harp too much on that Dylan Mulvaney character, but He's like getting a Tampax sponsorship. Now the Bud Light and other stuff, whatever, dude. Do what you want. You're a private company. Do whatever the fuck you want. I don't care. I mean, I thought it was kind of silly, and it's definitely not. It doesn't speak to the people who drink that product, which is dumb. But I'm not a fit. People are like asking for an apology. Apologize for what? They made a dumb mistake. They shouldn't have to apologize for that. They're doing what they want to do. But tampons seem like there's only one thing to use that for. And I'm not sure what a man is going to fucking do with it exactly. It doesn't make any sense. That's how fucking ridiculous this has all gotten.
Well, and I think his story around that was like he's in the bathroom, the women's washroom, obviously. He would call it the girls' washroom because for some creepy reason he seems to identify more with girls than with women, despite the fact that he's an adult. He was like in the washroom and a girl asked him if he had a tampon and he was like, "This is what it's like to be a real girl." And it's not. Like I've never been asked for a tampon in the bathroom. This is like some TV story that men tell themselves, just like girls are like having pillow fights and unhooking each other's bras for them and each other in the change room. But yeah, I mean, what a joke. Like this guy is being celebrated for his days of girlhood, his transition into girlhood, and being paid who knows how much money, a lot, to promote all of these women's products. He was modeling sports bras for Nike, and yeah, apparently he's selling Tampax, and it's so insulting. I mean, those kinds of things you almost can't really care about because you're like, well, it's a horrible corporation. Like, why are you expecting them to have any kind of ethics or integrity? Like, all of their politics are only going to be about money. Like, all of these corporations who were like bigging up Black Lives Matter, like, I don't think that they actually care about police violence or I mean Black Lives Matter was obviously a scam and a joke, but I mean these companies are just going to glom on to any kind of political movement that they can make money from.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously. But yeah, I mean his whole shtick is like sexist nonsense that insults women, and
well, that's kind of what drag is,
very weird
though,
how
right?
much supporting he's getting.
Like drag is not. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's. I've been to shows young as when I was younger and stuff, and it's funny sometimes. I mean, but it's intended to be kind of the male perspective caricature of a woman, right? Like they don't.
It's supposed to be exaggerated and hyperbolic. It's supposed to be satirical, I think.
Right. But
like
that. Oh my God, dude. It's like we're taking jokes and making them into reality. Not that it was a joke or anything like that. I don't mean to belittle people, but it was kind of. It was a caricature, right? And we're making that like, no,
nobody thought
real.
Those men were like real women or even that they were trying to be real women.
And quite a few of them aren't even gay. They're just like fucking, they think it's fun. I don't even know if it's a fetish really. It's just something people do for fun. But anyways, it seems like we have done quite a bit of that, which is move ridiculous things into the epistemology. And now it's very 1984 feeling, you know what I mean? Where it's like in the end, the state would say that 2 + 2 = 5, and you would have to believe it because the logic of their position demands it, I think is the quote. Yeah, that's like, maybe that's the logical conclusion of having to keep that problem a problem even after it's a problem. So you have to keep pushing farther and farther, and at some point you circle all the way back to just being a completely ridiculous caricature of what you were intending to do in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like we're being tested to see what we'll put up with. Like, what kind of ridiculous stunt can we pull now that people will go along with and or applaud? What ridiculous mantra can we get people to repeat now without thinking about it and without actually admitting that they don't believe the mantra? I mean, I do literally sometimes think, I'm like, is this all like a psyop? Like, is this all just a big, like, is this clown show a big distraction so that we aren't paying attention to the real nefarious stuff that these people are doing behind the scenes? Because it's so embarrassing and ridiculous. I mean, I'm so embarrassed for what will show up in the history books if civilization
I mean,
is still around in 100 or 200 years.
Yeah, I think Elon needs to slow down a little bit because if if aliens show up right now, or if we go out and see aliens, they're gonna be like, "What the fuck is wrong with you guys?" Like we're not gonna get invited back for a second date. I don't think. Um,
No.
uh,
Like, who are these jokers?
I wanna pivot a
We-
little bit. I want to ask you about, because you're an actual feminist and not a crazy person, about women's role in society, generally speaking, and how we have that conversation. So it's generally been true historically that when individuals have the power, they will intentionally use it to benefit society. And when the state has more power, people tend to turn inward and prioritize themselves. I don't know if this is like some kind of social fight or flight situation or what it is, or maybe it's that, I don't know. But I wonder how to have conversations about the state of society and our respective roles in it without implying that somebody should or should not do something, right? Because something can be objectively good or bad, but that doesn't mean that I have the right to tell you to do it or that you should be expected to. You can do whatever you want, right? Um,
I
but
mean, I think that
yeah,
it's
go ahead.
one thing. Sorry,
No, no,
do you want
no, no. Go
to?
ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. I mean, I think it's one thing to have public debates about what people should and should not do. I think that those should happen all the time and forever. Like, I think we should always be having conversations about ethics and morality and good practice and, what it means to be a good person, what kinds of policies and practices and behaviors would build a better society. But it's another thing if we're talking about policy and legislation,
Hmm.
right? That kind of thing we have to be a lot more careful around. And I think that it's really important that we do everything that we can to protect people's individual rights,
Well,
civil
because it works,
liberties.
right? I mean, if you track that historically, the times when there have been little or decentralized government control over people's lives, typically speaking, they do the right thing. They are more charitable. They have larger families typically, right? And
Mm.
things tend to go a bit better. But I wonder how we have that conversation around women, especially in like where we are today with modern feminism, I guess. So we know without question that two parent homes where the mother is present go better for children. We know that for a fact, right? We also know that better children make better societies. That's obvious. But it seems like, well, it's not. It doesn't seem like more and more likely these days that women do not have children, right? That
Yeah.
they prioritize their career, or they don't feel ready, or they can't find a partner, or financial issues, or whatever it is. In a recent study that popped up a couple of months ago, suggests that after 30, if a woman's not a mother, she only has a 50% chance of becoming a mother, and it reduces by about 10% per year after that. And we see declining birth rates broadly in the West. And men are also opting out of that as well. It's not just women. I don't, we're talking about women. That's why I say it that way. But I wonder how you can have that conversation with people, because it's a very personal decision to make. I really don't think that anybody should be pressured into being a parent. I certainly don't want people who don't want kids having them, because that doesn't seem like a good idea. But the data does suggest that when if a man wants to make the world a better place, his community especially, but society generally a better place, he will father children and teach them to be strong and kind and work hard and take care of the people around them and be self-reliant. And women who want to make the world a better place or their community a better place will prioritize having children, teaching them to be good people and all that. Doesn't mean to imply that you're bad if you don't do that, but one of those choices is clearly better for society than the other. And I wonder how you have that conversation without making it sound like I'm telling you to go out and fucking, have a bunch of kids that you don't want. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough one. Like I don't have kids and I never wanted kids. I've never had any interest in babies. I've never
Mm.
been interested in having babies inside my body or in my house. So
Is there a sign on the front door? No babies. It's like a baby with a circle and a line through it.
not a very welcoming place to kids, I'll say that. But Yeah, so that's never been a conflict for me. The thing that I've noticed that is really unfortunate is that a lot of women my age, in the past, I don't know, let's say 4 or 5 years, have realized that they do want to have kids and maybe they're too old. And they don't have a partner.
Mm.
Like now finally they're like, okay, I'm ready to have kids. Like I'm 40 years old. And it's like, dude, like this is not this is not optimal time for you to be trying to reproduce. Like you may have really missed the window
Mm.
here. And there is something to be said about blaming the feminist movement for that. I mean, I fully believe in a woman's right to choose, but you need to be aware of what the consequences of those choices are. Like if you do want to have kids and you do want to have a family, you really do need to start planning for
Mm.
that early in your life. You should be thinking about that in your 20s because you need to be looking for a partner to do that with. And
Uh,
you need to do it before you can't do it anymore.
sure, yeah, and it takes sometimes years to make that happen. I mean, not everyone is lucky enough just to get pregnant on the first try. If you consider that to be lucky, I don't think you would. But you know what I've seen a lot lately, um, is we've spent a lot of time over the past 5 or 6 years or so talking about nihilism in young men, especially young men that have no purpose. That the broader purpose of masculinity is to provide and protect, but there's a rage. There's an underlying violent tendency to it that if not tempered and trained to be used accordingly, can be used in some pretty shitty ways, right? Gang
Hmm.
violence, terrorism, mass shooters, all this shit, suicide even. And I have to assume that the woman that you're describing, the 40-year-old who's just finally realized she wants children, but isn't really in a position to have them anymore, that's got to come into play as well, right? I mean, I, I have no idea. I know as a dude, I want to be a dad, and I want to father children. There's a biological imperative, and I assume it's the same for women. Maybe feels differently, but I think it's probably close to the same. And if you realize at some point that that's not an option for you anymore, that's got to feel pretty shitty. And I would imagine it has some of the same effects that it does on men, which is to say, I've got all of this pent up rage now that isn't going to go anywhere. And rage turned inwards is depression, right? Which ultimately is going to lead to nihilism if you're not living for some kind of purpose. And I don't know how to communicate this to people. Young people are like, "Oh, I'll do that later" or whatever. And yeah, there's a lot of societal factors involved. Not being able to buy homes, student loans, and all this stupid bullshit that we've done to kids, fucking up the economy more broadly speaking. But I have to assume that there's some nihilism that comes into play there.
I mean, I think that a lot of women do get depressed when they get to that age and they realize they're not going to have the life that they thought that they could have, that they were told that they could have. And there's a number of lies that need to be addressed in terms of this having it all thing, which is that you can't really have it all. You do have to put your career aside if you want to have kids and raise kids. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of women who maintain their careers and go to work and still manage to juggle kids. But like also, people I think have denied the fact that mother and baby need to be together and mother and baby want to be together,
Sure.
and that's
Yeah.
healthy for the mother and baby. Like you don't just fucking pop out a baby and then 2 weeks later go back to work full time. Some people
Yeah.
have
See you
to, but
after high
that's
school.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. Like you need that bonding time. You need to be feeding your baby. You need to be holding your baby and touching your baby and breastfeeding. Those things are really, really important to the development of the baby, mentally, emotionally, physically, as well as to the mental health of the woman. Nature is still really important, and I think that we have humans have sort of taken this approach where we think that we've overcome or evolved past nature and we haven't and we shouldn't try to.
That's so stupid.
Um,
Like
yeah.
the hubris that we've somehow outsmarted 2 million years of evolution is the dumbest goddamn thing that I think the average human being thinks. Oh, you think you're smarter than millions of years of iterations of this thing. I mean, think about a computer running for the last 200 years, and you think you're gonna do math better than that? That's fucking dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously there's lots of things that we should push back on that are bad things like murder and rape.
Sure.
But those things are not bad things. That's a positive thing, the mother baby bond and the mother being with her baby. So that's like a thing that I think that we need to start having big conversations about. Like we need to stop being realistic instead of trying to like impose this delusion rooted in politics around women having it all and you can do whatever you want and like, you can wait till you're 40 and you can just freeze your eggs. Like that's another really nasty lie because so many women think, "Oh, I'll just freeze my eggs and then when I'm like 43 or so, I'll just go have a baby." And freezing your eggs is, first of all, extremely expensive. And second of all, is not a guarantee of anything. Just
Mm.
because you have frozen eggs does not mean that you're going to be able to actually make a baby. And women are not told that. I think it's a very predatory industry. The surrogacy industry is another one too. Like, oh, I'll get another woman to make a baby for me, which is disgusting in a myriad of ways. To pay for the use of another woman's literal body, a woman who is like almost 100% gonna be poorer than you
Hmm.
because she's doing it because she needs the money. It's really unhealthy and dangerous for the surrogate. It's again bad for the baby. Like it's just these industries that are framed as feminist, like this is about women's liberation and women's choice are obviously more about money than anything else, but are actually really bad for women.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the putting the career side, or the phrase "having it all." It comes from Murphy Brown, right? I don't know if you remember that
Oh, of
show
course.
from the
I
early
love
'90s,
that
but
show.
that's where it
Yeah.
came from. She was an attorney, single, decided to have. There was a whole story arc in the show where she decided to have a kid without a dad and all this stuff. It's like, oh, she's a hero. Like, look, single motherhood. We've kind of turned single mothers into heroes in our society, and that isn't. I'm not implying that they're not doing a lot of work that needs to get done. Obviously, that is the case. But that to me is more of a cautionary tale and less of a tale about a superhero. You know what I mean? It's like that's not it's not a judgment on the single mother. It's that we should probably try to avoid single motherhood if we can. I think that's probably a good idea, right? It's not something that you should strive for, certainly, because the kid needs both. We're all fucking pretty binary as human beings. We need the empathy and we need the strength. We need both of those things. We need to learn them as early as possible from people that care about us. I mean, I was talking to a guy yesterday on a show about love. Like when you from one from birth until whenever a child starts understanding complex ideas, they're going to hear the phrase "I love you" probably as much as anything else because the parent wants to say it. They want to get the kid to say it back to them. It's a whole fucking bonding experience. But what it means, the phrase "I love you" inside that child's head, depends on how you treat them, not what you say, right? Because they're going
Mhm.
to associate the phrase "I love you" with you and how you behave towards them, whether you're there, right? Whether you're fucking a dick where you're bringing a bunch of random people around them and stuff like that. And this is how our brains formulate a construct for the concept of love for the rest of our lives during these initial period. And I think it's probably, well, I don't think it is statistically true that it is better for them to have loving parents, right? That love them, that are present, as you said, especially the bonding between the mother and the baby in the first like 18 months to 2 years of life. But it turned into a moral issue. It's like, if you have this conversation with a modern feminist, they're gonna bring up one. I'm not a broodmare for the state. Okay, cool, dude. Do what you want. Nobody's trying to judge you here. All right. But they'll also bring up things like the gender pay gap. The gender pay gap is almost entirely the result at this point in American history of women who leave the workforce and both lose that several years of income plus their promotability, I guess, for time and service or whatever you want to call it. But we turn that into like a sexist thing, like society's sexist because women are choosing to be mothers. How is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, continuing to rail on about the pay gap nowadays, I think, is pretty silly for the reasons that you describe. I mean, at one time there was a literal gender
Hmm.
pay gap where men were paid more for the exact same work that women were doing. But you're right. It's because women leave the workplace to have babies and they lose that trajectory, they lose the promotions, and they lose that income. And that's how it goes. You can't have it all. You literally can't have it all. And women need to understand that. Like if you want to have kids, there are going to be some consequences. This is going to have an impact on your life. Are you crazy? It's a child. Like that you're going to have to raise for your entire life. You can't keep living as you were before. And, I think that women should be able to make whatever choices they want to make. And I'm incredibly grateful that I've been able to make
Hmm.
choices and shape my life in the way that I have because I love my life and I'm really happy. But the reality is that most women are going to want to have kids. Most women do want to have a family. Most women aren't like me. Like
Hmm.
I'm an anomaly. I'm not the norm. And we should be realistic about that and, explain to young women what that entails. And like I do have big respect for single moms because it's so freaking
Hmm.
hard. But you're right. It shouldn't be the plan if it cannot be. I mean, and I have big respect for women who leave abusive relationships.
Yeah.
Because yes, it's important for that there be a mother and a father, but it's more important that a kid not be raised around someone who's violent to
Hmm.
them or that they have to watch a man abusing their mom. And that's a really, really hard thing to do for a variety of reasons. And so that's like, I think there's a lot of like shitting on single moms, and I think that we have to acknowledge that I think a lot of women do leave the father for a good reason. I
Hmm.
don't think that women are leaving men willy-nilly, which is, I think, what some right-wing pundits imply. Like, oh, I'm just gonna get a divorce, as if like a divorce is like a fun and easy
Yeah,
thing to
yeah.
go through.
Well, I think it's far more common that women stay in shitty situations longer because of the kids,
Oh, wait,
frankly.
for sure.
Uh, I don't
Absolutely.
I don't know a whole lot of women who have just been in a relatively good situation, but like, you know what? I'm done. Just gonna go
I want a
upend.
new guy.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
gonna upend my entire life.
let's go.
That's a trope that I don't think exists in real life. Honestly, I mean, sure, I'm sure there are examples. There's plenty of shitty people out there, but that seems kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I'm in no position to talk to women in their 20s about this stuff, but I wonder, I don't hear those voices. You know what I mean? There's a lot of dudes out there like me who've lived lives and are educated, have different kinds of experiences, talking to young men about, making a plan, ensuring that you're fulfilling your biological purpose. You know what I mean? Which I think is important. We're not outsmarting nature here. It's just not going to fucking happen. And you can say that you're going to outsmart and stuff. This is not going to happen, man. But I don't hear a lot of voices like that for women these days. Maybe because I'm not the audience for it, I don't see it. But I feel like I'm a pretty avid consumer of social topics, and I just don't see the advocates for motherhood from the female side out there. I think mostly what I see are right wing dudes telling young women to have kids, and that's not that they're wrong to say that necessarily, but that's not gonna go over. Nobody's listening to that asshole.
No, I don't think that's gonna work. I mean, I think that modern feminism, third wave feminism, has really spent an inordinate amount of time and energy convincing women that they have moved beyond nature and that actually talking about nature is a bad thing. I mean, in my early days of feminism, I learned and believed that evolutionary biology or evolutionary psychology was like this inherently sexist thing. Because it talked about nature.
Mm,
Like it talked about what was natural and, men have evolved in this way and women have
mm,
evolved in this way. And feminism says everything's about socialization. So you can learn and unlearn anything, which is not true. I think that it's to our detriment to believe that, and I think that it would be beneficial if we understood things like, men are inherently more violent.
mm.
They are. And men need to learn, and as a society, we need to address that, but also men as individuals need to understand that and take it upon themselves to, you know, take that inherent nature and use it for good. Like, I just interviewed this guy, Matt Thornton,
Oh,
who's
I know Matt.
oh, you do?
Hmm.
Okay, cool. Um, so he, as you know, brought BJJ
Hmm.
Jiu-Jitsu to Portland.
Yep.
And he just published a book called The Gift of Violence.
Hmm.
And what I learned from that book and from him, and I'd been learning about this a little bit prior just from talking to like MMA guys and fighters and things like that. Um, but things like jujitsu, martial arts, that kind of practice is such like an excellent and important way for men to, first of all, learn how to defend themselves and defend those around them, like those more vulnerable than them, women and children, for
Hmm.
example, and to be confident, to trust themselves, and to also not behave in like thuggish, aggressive ways, right? Because if you know, like you actually know that you could win the fight. Like
Hmm.
you actually know that you could take this guy down who's being a dick in a bar. You learn not to antagonize. You learn not to pick a fight. You learn to walk away. But if you have to, you can defend yourself. And I think that's like a really great example of positive masculinity. There's been all these debates around toxic masculinity in the public sphere, which I think are a bit silly sometimes. But violence is not, first of all, violence is natural. Violence is always going to be there. Men are always going to be inherently violent in some way or another, but it's that they need to learn how to use that violence in a good and responsible way, by not picking on those who are vulnerable, like women and children, um, animals, but also, yeah, to use that responsibly. And I think that feminism, and I have to admit that I was a part of this for a long time. Feminism opposes all violence, like
Hmm.
it's like we want a non-violent world and like, all male, eradicate male violence, eradicate male violence. Male violence is bad. And when we're talking about male violence against women, yes, for sure. But again, I mean, I wish that we could stop all male violence against women, but that's not realistic either. There's always going to be some level of, there's going to be bad guys
Hmm.
and guys that do bad things to women, and we need to learn how to deal with that. And we can't just address it through mantras, feminist mantras, or, trying to socialize our way out of that. And I think that, yeah, we do need to stop talking about violence as like an inherently bad thing because it's not in all situations.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the toxic masculinity that people refer to oftentimes just generally as masculinity, unfortunately. But the reality is
Right. Like
it,
men should be more like women. That would make things better.
yeah,
That's
that's
not true.
that. No, it's nonsense. That's nonsense. Yeah, I wonder. I've seen more and more women who, such as yourself, who have been really into the feminist movements over the past couple of decades, kind of circle back and be like, you know what would be nice is like real men would be
Yeah.
nice, dudes that aren't fucking pussies, you know, guys who are responsible. I mean, maybe frankly, I'm sure that has a lot to do with the childless mother situation we have these days. Because, frankly, if I was a woman in her 20s right now, looking around at the field of prospects, I don't know how thrilled I would be to let one of them put a baby inside me. You know what I mean? Like, are they gonna even be around, or is it just some fucking clown who's gonna fucking skip town at the first opportunity?
Or is he gonna sit on the couch and play video games all day?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Is he actually gonna grow up and be a man?
Yeah, I mean, it's the really unfortunate part is it seems like the people that should be having kids are smart enough, quote unquote, smart enough to opt out of it right now, and it's just making the problem worse. Which is, it is what it is. I guess there's nothing you can really do about that except for try to talk to people about it. But that's that's a conversation for another day. We've got to get going here, but I want you to tell people where they can find you, where they can find your work, um, all that stuff. If you've got any publications, I know you've got an feministcurrent.com, but is that like do you have anything in print? Do you have books or anything?
Not yet. I have a manuscript that I wrote like back in 2017 kind of thing, and then my publisher dropped me because they determined that I was transphobic. And then after that happened, I got really busy, and then I changed my mind about all sorts of stuff. So I'm in the
Mm,
process of rewriting that. But it is a critique of third wave feminism, but
okay.
I've changed my views on feminism and socialism so much that since then that there's a lot of stuff I need to rewrite and add. So I'm still working on that. So not yet published. What my I have been focusing on mostly these days is The Same Drugs, which is my podcast,
Mm,
and that show is on YouTube and Rumble also. And on Substack. So I'm writing on Substack, and the podcast is there also at The Same Drugs. Feminist Current is the website that I started in 2012 to, really so that there was a space for me and women like me to talk about things and write about things and criticize things that there really wasn't space for in the mainstream at the time, such as third wave feminism, pornography, prostitution, and then, of course, gender identity, which we were all massively silenced on. When I was trying to speak out against gender identity in 2015 and even a little bit earlier than that, I was not, nobody would publish me. And when I did publish stuff about that, it would get taken down and censored. And there were petitions to have me fired and all that kind of thing. So I'm really grateful to have had that website all of those years. I've just been moving away from it because, honestly, I'm really kind of interested in talking about other things. And
mm.
I'm certainly interested in talking outside the limitations of feminism. But that is feministcurrent.com. And I'm back on Twitter thanks to Rogan and Elon Musk. Um, After 3 years, I was fucking banned for 3 years, and then I got back on. So I'm at Megan E. Murphy.
And tell me again the name of the show.
It's The Same
Same
Drugs.
drugs. Good. I'm subscribed to it. I just like to hear you say it. Um,
Oh, awesome.
I'm glad you're doing this stuff. It's good. It's crazy how just stating the obvious has become such a taboo situation. But
Yeah, I
we,
know.
we live
I
in some
very
wild ass
rarely feel
times.
like I'm saying anything controversial, and yet apparently I am.
Yeah. Yeah. God forbid we define what a woman is or anything like that. It would be
How could
really,
we?
really out of pocket. Well, look,
Who
I
knows?
appreciate you coming on today. It's been a really good conversation. A little different change of pace for our audience, topic wise, but I think it's important that people understand kind of some of the craziness that's going on behind the scenes. And it isn't just straight white males that are getting attacked by this woke mob all the time. It's pretty much anybody who steps out of line. So you can find a lot of compatriots out there who may not think exactly like you do, but they believe in the same core principles, which is reality is reality, and we have the right to talk about it.
Absolutely. It was great to meet you.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this
For sure. We'll do
conversation.
it again sometime. Thanks for coming again. We appreciate it, and thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.